This is part 3 of the 4-part video series constructing the Lego Robot Educator driving base. In this part, we will build the caster wheel assembly and attach it to the driving base. This part encompasses steps 24 through 31. The caster wheel is the third wheel that the robot will rest on. In step 24, we have 3 pieces. The first one is an angle beam that is 2x4 with a 90-degree angle. Then we have a 3M peg with friction and a 3M axle. Now we'll orient the 2x4 angle beam so that the long side is horizontal and the short side is on the right and it is sticking up away from you. Take the 3M axle and insert it into the axle hole that is on the far left and just push it down until it bumps into the table. Then take the shorter side of the 3M peg and it will go into a hole on the long side again. We're going to skip a hole from the axle and it will go into the next hole. And so then there's still an empty hole in the corner. So it's empty hole in the corner, tall peg, empty hole, and then on the far left is the axle sticking up. Once we have those pegs inserted, we're going to stand this up on its long end with the peg sticking out to the right. So it's standing up, so its little two side is sticking up into the air and the pegs are sticking out to the right. In step 25, we will add an angular beam with 4 snaps. It's the 90-degree 4-snap beam. And we'll put that flat on our table and we'll orient it such that 2 pegs are sticking up away from us and 2 pegs are facing to the right. So 2 pegs away from you and 2 pegs to the right. And we're going to slide that into our 2x4 angular beam that we were just working on. There are 2 empty holes. Remember, we skipped holes when we put the axle and the peg in. And so in those empty holes, we'll just slide that in. So one of those snaps is going into the corner on the 2x4 beam, and the other one is fitting into the other empty hole. So we have an assembly now with that angular beam with the 4 snaps is flat on the table. There are 2 pegs facing away from us, and then our 2x4 beam is kind of standing on its longer leg and the 2 side is facing up, and we have a long peg and an axle facing to the right. In step 26, we will add the power joint. Now my power joint already has a steel ball inside of it because once you put the ball in there, you pretty much leave it in there. Yours may or may not already have the steel ball in it. At this point, it does not matter. So on that power joint, there is 1 hole on the top and there are 2 holes on the side separated by a space. And it's those 2 holes on the side that we're going to connect to the unit we just made using the peg and the axle to go through those 2 holes. Just push it all the way on there. And when you're done, either the ball side or the flat side of your power joint is facing down and the other unit is still in the same orientation where you have on the beam with 4 snaps, 2 pegs facing away from us. Then we have the little part of our 2x4 beam sticking up. So that's our unit at this point. In step 27, we have one part to add. It's another of our 2x4 angle beams. And this one will just go on the other side. We're kind of making a sandwich of the power joint. So we'll take the long side of that 2x4 and the front, and the long side is vertical. The little 2 side is sticking up and away from us. And when you put it on there, the ends of everything should be flush. So the power joint and the 2 L-beams should be flush. And make sure your little 3M axle is not sticking out on either side. Sometimes it gets pushed a little bit when you're adding that next angle beam on. So now you've got a little sandwich with the power joint in the middle of the 2 of the 2x4 90-degree angular beams. We're making a symmetrical unit, so in step 28 we're going to add another one of our angular beam with 4 snaps, and now it's going to go in from the right, and I have it oriented on my table so that it's flat on my table. 2 pegs are facing away from me and 2 pegs are facing to the left. Now this is going to get added into the bottom of the 2x4 90-degree beam into the empty holes. So the snap that's farthest away from you goes into the corner hole, and then the other one goes into the other empty hole. So now you should have a unit that has 4 pegs coming off of the side that's facing away from you. There are the 1M sides are sticking up out of the 2x4 beam, and your power joint is on the bottom. And then I'll just set that unit aside for a moment. In step 29 we have 8 pieces. We have 2 double cross blocks, and then we have 2 pegs with friction, and then we have 4 friction cross axle connectors. Let's divide these into 2 groups. So each group will have 1 of the double cross blocks, 1 of the pegs with friction, and 2 of the friction cross axle connectors. Going to make 2 identical units. We'll take our double cross block and stand it up so that on the top are the 2 cross axle connections, 1 on each end. And then take your 2 friction cross axle connectors and put the cross ends into each of those crosses. Now you should have a little unit with 2 pegs sticking up out of the top, and then from the front side there's a hole, and you'll insert your peg with friction into that hole. So there are 2 pegs on the top and 1 peg sticking out the other direction on the side. And we'll do that again. Cross block with the 2 axle connectors on the top. Stick in the axle ends of our friction cross axle connectors into those 2 spots. And then on the side, insert the friction peg. Now I'm going to take one of those units and turn it over so that the 2 pegs are coming out of the bottom, and then I'll turn it so that the 1 peg coming out of the side is facing towards the back, away from me. So 2 pegs are now coming out of the bottom, and the other peg coming out of the side is facing away from me. And then on our caster assembly, we still have it oriented with the 4 pegs facing away from us. Now on one of those sides locate the 2 pegs, and right on top of those 2 pegs, on each peg there's a hole. And that's where the 2 pegs on the bottom of the little assemblies we just made are going to be inserted. So if you put those 2 together, what you'll end up with on each side is you'll still have the 2 original pegs sticking out to the back, and now there's a 3rd peg sticking out to the back that is above those first 2 pegs and centered. And then you'll repeat the process on the other side. There's 2 holes, one above each of those pegs sticking out to the back. Put our little double cross block assembly into those 2 holes, so that on the other side you have 2 pegs sticking out to the back on the bottom, and then slightly above it there's 1 additional peg sticking out to the back that is centered. In step 30, if your steel ball is not already in the power joint, flip the unit over and insert the steel ball until it snaps into place in the power joint. So now we have this unit oriented so that our steel ball is facing up and all of our little pegs are facing away from us. So we have 3 pegs on either side. I'm just going to keep it in that orientation, but put it off to my right a little bit and bring in my robot assembly that is still upside down with the 2 plugs of the motors facing me. So if you pick up this assembly, and let's look at the holes that we have available here. Directly above the plug on each motor there are 3 holes right next to the plug. And then from the beam that we added, there are 2 additional holes that are aligned with the outside holes. And it's these holes that we'll use when we put the caster assembly on. If you remember, we've got we have a center connector on the bottom, and that will go into the center connector right above the plug, and then the other 2 pegs will go into holes on the beam frame. So it gets centered on the plugs. If you center it on the plugs, you might have to wiggle it around, work on one side at a time, and just kind of start them in, wiggle them around until they fit in, and then give it a good push until you'll hear a snap when everything snaps together. And now we'll just turn the whole unit over so that the caster ball is on the bottom, and we'll be ready to add our brick. This is the end of part 3.